Hi, Beth. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm gonna try to pull up the agenda notes. So, how are you doing?
Just trying to keep on, keep it on. Totally
Yeah,
missed the whole goal 6 occurrence over the past few days. Sorry.
that's all right. You got to follow your energy. There's a lot of I don't
Yeah.
know if you're like me. You're on a lot of calls.
Yeah. It's crazy how fast the days are going. Everybody, I hear people complaining about having nothing to do, and it's like the opposite for me anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about
I think you just have to balance your energy. So,
yeah.
so that's good. Let me try and pull up these notes and um, so I will. Do you have a popcorn question you want to ask?
Mm.
You can think about it while other people join the call. We're a little bit early, and I know I'll have to add the notes again after everybody gets on because you can't see. So there's a lot of things I'm learning about Zoom. Like it's really hard um, to try to keep up with the chat and take notes, and then new people come on and they can't see what was chatted before they came on,
Yeah.
so that's challenging. Oh, the tornado sirens are going off.
What? Oh, tornado.
We don't have a tornado. It's on Wednesdays at noon in our city. The tornado sirens get tested.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a regular thing.
Have you talked to Enoch or anybody in Chattanooga to see how they're doing?
So Enoch's okay, Jennifer's okay. Who else have I talked to? David Hirsch, they're okay. So as far as I know, the people that I know personally are doing okay. Hey, Brett,
Hey,
good to see you.
hey.
Yeah, so as I mean, I checked with the ones that I checked with, and that's about all I know. Hi, Valto. What time is it? Oh, nice haircut. Is that your Corvid haircut?
Yes, it is.
Ah, I have some friends who are doing that. It's much simpler, and I've been thinking about it. I think what is it? The common wisdom is don't cut your own hair.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, there's a story behind this. So I have my son is 16, and you know how boys are at that age. So he had a hair like this, and there was that we tried to get it like cleaned up, and then he made a bet with me that if I cut my hair, he will cut his.
That's
So
that's
I was fully on board with that to get that done.
You have a
that's a
before and
little,
after?
huh?
I'd love to
What
see
did
the
you?
before and after of your son.
Yeah, I need to pick those photos from somewhere, but it was like he was very proud of his hair, but it started to look like bird's nest. So
I get that.
now it's
You
all
should.
clean. Now it's all nice and neat.
I know that's a really bad bet to make though, to bet the whole haircut thing with your child, or bet anything with your child actually.
Yeah.
I've learned. So so it's good to see people again, face to face ish. So welcome everybody. We were trying to think of a good popcorn question, and I'll drop the agenda into the chat so that we can keep score at home. Hang on, let me make sure I get the right goal one, because otherwise I'll be doing the last goal call I was on. So so popcorn question of the day. Hey, welcome CJ. What what is your guilty pleasure snack food while you're at home? So I'm going to kick it off to Beth, who is on the call first.
Hey everybody, great to see familiar faces. My guilty pleasure, I do keto eating, so I found an awesome keto snickerdoodle recipe, my absolute favorite cookie, and also keto no bakes. Those are my go-to snacks. And I'll popcorn over to CJ.
Well, aside from coffee, does that count? I tend to these days eat actually fried liver of all things because it's healthy in protein. No, it's good for chicken liver. Everybody's shaking their head. No, it's actually very tasty, very healthy, and it helps you avoid eating all the other snacks that are in the house. Have I just been ostracized from the group for this?
No, it's fine. You get to, when we popcorn, you get to call on the next person, CJ.
Brett.
All right, well, so we just had Easter here and the bunny made his trip. And so now I find myself eating all the Easter candy that the bunny brought. Specifically Reese's Pieces. There's just, always a good time of year for those, right? And I will kick it to Andy.
Beer a snack? I've been drinking a lot more beer lately. I had to support the local breweries, so I had to, buy that. They're entrepreneurs. I'm going to support the entrepreneurs. So then you need chips with that. So I've been a lot of chips, and that's too salty. So you got to have something sweet. So they need chocolate. I have a lot of snacks. I'm a big snack fan.
What's the brewery?
Oh, we've been rotating through. What was the last one we had that was really good? Oh, actually, this one isn't local, but it is a community-owned brewery. But actually, the folks that do Fat Tire have a new lager called Mountain Time. It's really, really light and nice. Highly recommend. And then I'm in Nebraska right now, so we just bought a big old box of Nebraska. They're doing these pallets of beer, and it's sort of a hodgepodge of their beers. So it's really helpful because you can only go once to the store, and you don't want to buy 6 cases. You just buy one hodgepodge. So we've been making our way through Nebraska brewing companies, a menagerie of flavors. I'm gonna go with Volto.
Well, here we have, of course, in Finland and in Scandinavia in general, we have the Finnish candy or called salmiakki, which is it's like a hard licorice candy. So it's like a really, really spicy black. It's like licorice, but it's stronger. So that's kind of like a local thing, and it's also even with like people who live here, they either like it or don't, but it's something that that is I really like it. So it's, you have all kinds. You have that like in hard candy, you have that in soft, different levels of strength. You can go crazy with that. I will definitely bring it along with me next time, so you'll get the authentic experience. But that's something that you can you can always eat that.
We'll trade Nebraska beer for beer candy when we see you.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's one day.
Well, take Hassan.
Hey, thanks, Walto. So not as glamorous as everybody else's, but I've been eating a lot of canned sardines. And I'm a chocolate fiend, and I don't have any chocolate in my house. So like a true fiend, I've been raiding the bag of chocolate chips that would be reserved for chocolate chip cookies.
So you do have chocolate in your house?
Yeah, just the chocolate chips that would be reserved for the cookies. Let's see, who has not gone yet? Mike, did you go yet?
I have not. Very, very clear. I usually have to think about these for a while, but ice cream, far and away. Kara and I both, like a tiny little bowl of ice cream most nights. We have Graders right up the street from us, which is this sort of institution in Cincinnati and beyond. And we made a huge curbside pickup order, and are kind of slowly working our way through the masses of ice cream. So They're famous. Oprah condoned graders years ago, and it changed their world. So yeah.
That makes a difference, right? It makes it taste better, right? And I guess, so picking up from where Hassan left off, I have been craving, so chocolate, dark chocolate covered pretzels. It's the dark chocolate, obviously good for you, right? And the pretzels, and so the salty sweet mix. But yeah, I'm gonna run out soon and have to go replenish and hope that nobody else picks up on that. So Beth dropped the document into the chat, and as many of you may know, and introductions to CJ for coming on, we are actually working towards creating a mission vision that we will be sharing at the ESHIP Summit, which is currently postponed, but still in the planning. So for those of you who may not know, we were supposed to be getting together at the end of June, and now it is postponed. We don't know exactly what form it will take, depending on what the restrictions are. I could let Andy talk about that a little bit more, but if you want to share.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing. So the ESHIP Summit is intended to be hosted. The Koch Foundation wants to host it still this year. We think it's important. There's 1,000 factors that go into rescheduling it. But if I were to guess, and this is not for tweeting or telling anyone else, but I would guess the date that seems most plausible based on a bunch of things, but there's no contract yet, is the last week in August. The reason I'm sharing with this group only is that it sounds like, I mean, my sense is that we still want to continue to move this group forward to try to come up with a draft of a vision statement or some version of that. And then we'll work with Mike's team at the Value Web to get feedback and input at the ESHIP Summit, whether that thing is in person or virtual or all the questions, some hybrid of the two, which we're still working out. But if this group wants to move forward, I would just say our goalposts have been moved now from trying to have something probably by early June to, let's just say, early August. And I will keep you apprised as soon as I know if there's a definitive date, or if the COVID situation forces us to keep pushing forward. We may have to think of an alternative way to get feedback if that is the case, or if we end up having to cancel the ESHIP Summit. But let's just operate as a group with the hope that there will be an event at the end of August, and then I will try to keep you all posted on that. We are exploring at this point all forms of possible ways to host the event, virtual and in person. So it's all just up in the air. But I just want to make sure this group has a clear sort of guideposts as to where we're headed. So happy to answer any questions, but that's tentative and not to be tweeted because it's definitely not confirmed.
Hi, Tiffany, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And before we turn it over to Mike to help facilitate more of this discussion on mission and vision, we want to ask you, since we all shared, what your guilty pleasure snack food is while you've been home.
So without hesitation, it's Keebler Elf double stuffed cookies. I bought a package with the intent for it to last a week. It lasted 9 hours, and I don't regret it.
Good for you. All right. Indulge yourself during this time. Mike, you want to share where we left off and where you'd like to lead us today?
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all. There's a few different directions that are being pursued. The document that was linked in the chat, thanks for that. We have these questions that we're working with. So does everybody have that up, or does somebody want to share a screen? It might be good to just take a look at what's there. But it's this sort of ongoing sandbox. There's so many pieces to this that one of the things were, thank you very much, Celia. Do you have the one that starts with our charge, the project team sandbox? Great. Thank you. And so just to ask everyone in the call who's had a chance to weigh in on that, I see Tiffany and Beth.
I think, hang on, I've got to get that's the project canvas. I'll get the sandbox document.
Okay.
Sorry. So many screens.
So many screens and documents. And so this was something that we have not, I believe, looked at since this has been put out there. Is that correct? As a group? Yeah. So if you have not yet had a chance to weigh into this, that would be a great activity to do, but it might not hurt for us to just kind of see what's here now and make sure that it's doing what we want it to do.
Hey, Mike, just for CJ's benefit, because I don't believe he was on the last couple calls, can you just set us up for what we're doing here?
Definitely, thank you. One of the points that Andy's made many times with good reason is that this goal has a slightly different role and function and way of playing compared to some of the others. Many of the others become sort of localized fields for being able to talk about projects and a way of generating projects toward advancing a particular goal. The vision is kind of a different beast. And so what we've been trying to do is understand, first of all, what do we mean by vision? For whom is a vision necessary? What are the ways in which the Kauffman Foundation can start to hold space for that vision, but for it to be held collectively by the field and those people who are doing this work and need a vision as a tool to be able to both connect with each other, self-identify, and start to move the work forward. And so at previous ESHIPs, there have been different attempts at this and different ways of defining that space. And by the way, please, anybody else hop in and share where you think this is at or any other input and fill in what I'm not. But being able to talk about what we need a vision for and how we want to define what the sort of the function of that artifact. How do we want that to play? What qualities should it have? As with many other efforts that I'm sure a lot of us are involved with, people have very different ideas about what a vision ought to do and what it ought to be, what a mission ought to do and be, what types of forms they've seen work and what's been successful. For some people, they have really strong beliefs about a vision having something measurable or a vision being as succinct as possible. And so we wanted to try and start to have some questions potentially. And again, this is all wrapped up in the ESHIP registration process and when that might be happening and what form it will take. But trying to have some very broad input into those questions from the people who are doing this work and who identify or who we might identify as ecosystem builders. And so some of the questions that we wanted to ask are here in this document. There were versions of that were iterated in Slack. But the main point of this is to try and understand what are all of the individual pieces that taken together might help us identify and point toward a vision for the field. Again, not something that any one person or organization can define by definition, but what are the ways that we might help facilitate and point towards something and invite people into a process that gets to some definition or some version of what we want to see in the future that we can all get behind and feel some ownership for. Happy for further input from anybody or.
I would just add that I think the sort of high level summary is that this group has decided that this small group will work to basically come together and bring our own perspectives plus a bunch of other input that was gathered in other ways to do a first draft of a vision for the professional field of ecosystem building that will further then have input and refine at the gathering of the ESHIP Summit, which is about hopefully 300 or 400 ecosystem builders from around the US. It may be then used to inform other things or other people doing the work, or it could be Synchronized Volta's doing a ton of work in Europe to get the people who are developing ecosystems together, and it might help us create some common shared language and sort of aims or visions or goals or whatever for the emerging professional field. But this is sort of the working group that's going to take the cut to try to get to some draft, like the first version of a bill, to use a government analogy, that will then be taken out of committee to the larger body of people. That's how I understand it.
So can I ask, before we set forth on trying to answer some of the questions, maybe I'm going to take a shifted approach towards this and ask what people have seen as bad practices or examples of things people do in vision and mission statements, so that we don't go down those rabbit holes. I think all of us have, as we've looked at companies, been part of organizations, know some that are really good examples, but there is a commonality, I think, with some of the things that you see as bad. So I think if we can call it out, then as we go down exploring the kind of language that we want to use, that we know what the pitfalls and filters are that we want to avoid or go towards. Does that make sense, Mike?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think it's a super valuable piece of the whole picture. I would love to know, maybe first, just a really quick round from everybody, if they have any questions on this, or where they're at on this, if there's been any further thinking. I think as an exercise we can all offer, I think that's a great place to go. I just would love a quick check-in to see if there's anything else that kind of bubbles up before digging into that. I know there's been some discussions on Slack, and obviously people, wondering if the world has changed over the last month or two. So just any kind of top of mind thoughts related to the vision.
I'll tell you what, can I chime in? I'm a latecomer here. I thought I'd maybe just lurk. My name is CJ Cornell. I'm a former Kaufman professor from Arizona State University and other universities. I'm down here in Phoenix, where we have a very robust ecosystem, but I'm very late to the game here. So I'm going to try to catch up by reading the document and the threads. So I had a question about the overall mission of the mission, if you will, which is this to create a template for all ecosystems? Is this something just for emanating out of Kaufman? And I don't know, maybe just very quickly, have you been looking at the ecosystem work being done? I'm going to read and find this out, but I was just curious about what the mission of the group is before we come up with a mission, if that makes sense.
Great question, CJ. Thank you and welcome. Glad you're joining. Would love everybody's thoughts. I'll take a quick shot at answering part of that, which is that this has been one of the questions that's come up: is for whom is this vision? How would people find this useful? What is needed? What does it make sense for us to take a shot at? And what can we help bring into existence? Again, recognizing that the extent to which Kaufman holds this and owns it themselves is the exact extent to which it is not useful for people beyond them. and so while they can help lead and start to codify some things and invite people to something, the whole point of this is that it's something people can use to identify themselves in. And hopefully that is true in the measure that they are able to partly co-create and have hands on it. I'll say that the questions you asked around, which ecosystems are we talking about and which builders are we talking about is another thing that's come up. And again, even today, part of what I'm wondering is how much has the current crisis shown us that ecosystems are all connected and these systems are all interconnected. And so the people who are doing good work in their communities now may previously, as we've noted many times, may not identify as entrepreneurial ecosystem builders. And so what are the ways that we can recognize what work is actually going on? Who are the people that we can bring into that definition and start to see themselves as fitting in that way? So that's my take on it. I'm sure there are others.
Well, I'll make one observation as maybe call it beginner's mind or newcomer here. is that there are a few ecosystems out there that are so robust that they probably don't need any help. And then there are all the others that are looking at them struggling to get off the ground. And some of the big questions that I've seen, because I've been all around looking at this, Phoenix was at ground zero. What I mean is level 0 10 years ago. And it grew organically. They put a lot of energy into it, but with a lot of mistakes. And yet there are other ecosystems, let's say Boulder, Colorado, et cetera, that had a clear leader. We had leaders here with Arizona State University, but that's a big issue, is the leadership. And I don't mean somebody stepping up. I mean, there's often a vying for leadership or different leadership roles, and not in a bad way. It's just that, this is not something usually where you can have one person run it. And so the question is, who runs it? And it can't be communal, because somebody, for instance, needs to own the Facebook channel. Somebody needs to approve messages and things like that. And so these are great questions. And a lot of burgeoning ecosystems need guidance in this so they don't make the same mistakes. So the question is, what's the set of tools? And then what are the major gotchas? Maybe we'll put that a different way. But what are the major issues? Who throttling different leaders, if you will. So no one person takes over. At the same time, making sure that the activity doesn't settle that back down to 0. So a lot of best practices is needed for all the newer ecosystems that are struggling out there. Just my 2 cents, quick observation.
CJ, can I ask, that's great, thank you. What's your level of, and I just want to understand more where you're coming from. Are you familiar with the ESHIP goals overall and sort of the work that's been done for the field in all those areas?
On and off. I've been trying to get up to speed and read them, which hence I'm joining a couple of these groups. So if I'm sounding naive, I apologize. And if that's why I hope to lurk, but there's not enough people on here for me to just lurk, if you will, and learn. So if I've said something that you've already covered, I apologize. It's just
no apologies.
Observation from a newcomer who's very familiar with being part of ecosystems and unfortunately with what doesn't work out there. So I'm going to put myself on mute, but feel free to correct me, censure me, or whatever you'd like.
All good, thank you. No, I was asking because I think you're touching on a lot of pieces that a lot of people on this call might say do reach across and touch the vision, but also fit into some of those other goals and the ways that they connect with each other. And so I think part of the challenge of this is figuring out what's the integration between and across this field building work. How much of it does the vision as something that we're trying to create and make sure is collectively held? How does that facilitate some of that? What does it define? What does it leave open? What is the work of those, what's going on in some of those other goal calls and those communities? So it's all valid. I was just kind of wondering, where you're coming from and some of that. So that was really helpful.
Well, I think Kaufman, in every place they work, are doing an extraordinarily important work. And, these days, not enough of it, and lack of, what's the phrase? When the eagles are silent, the parrot starts to jabber. And Kaufman has been a little silent in the past year. I know they're shifting, their mission and goals as well, but ecosystem leadership is needed out there. And right now it's just, a couple of ecosystems that have been successful and they're setting the pace, but I'm not sure it's the right, that's one of the reasons I'm here. I'm not sure it's being done in the right way.
Great. Andy or anybody else want to weigh in?
I mean, I would just share briefly, high level, some of the questions. I think CJ, all the questions you asked are very good. I think some just quick background, and then we can sort of roll into the questions here. But what is visible from sort of what we can see is all these people trying to build these ecosystems, just like you said, and obviously in a couple cities that's going really well. If you roll with Volto, who he can show you more cities in Europe and in South America and Asia who are trying to build ecosystems, but there's very little consensus on how it's done, why you do it, what are the steps, what are the leaders supposed to do, how to measure it. And so the work around the ESHIP goals is really around the annual summit event, which is trying to bring together practitioners to say, some academic or some foundation shouldn't go hide in the back and try to write all the rules and the playbooks on how that is, but actually involve the community. And so, this particular call, this group has decided to move forward on trying to just sort of take a first cut at what a vision for the field could be, and not just individual ecosystems, but an emerging profession, these folks called ecosystem developers or builders or whatever you want to call them, there's lots of names. And for communities that are ecosystem building, this vision could be something that they could hang a hat on, or at least be an inspiration for how they choose to frame the work they're doing in their local communities to build the ecosystem. And so I think your questions are very valid, which is who's this for, and how will they use it? And I think the notion here is let's just try a cut of it. Let's get some input from lots of people doing the work, and let's see if we can create something that's very, very helpful. Beth, I know, who's on the call, who has been very passionate about this particular initiative, may have other stuff to add, sort of why this work you think is so important, related to sort of why we're doing it. We don't have to go deep down that rabbit hole, because you're also saying, like, I'll sit back and listen, but just want to make sure we answered some of the questions that I think this group has dug into a little bit.
I think you guys covered it all. I'm good. It's just, I will say, I think all of us are just honored to be a part of building and growing this emerging field, and we take our this responsibility really seriously. So this vision and mission work is paramount, imperative that we do the best we can with it.
I was just going to add that Andy had shared, there's so many resources in this whole community, and everybody, again, has access to their own networks and their own, vision statements and mission statements and credos and, many different texts that we use to try and connect around. I know that we have easy access to some of those. Is the sandbox the right place to sort of use as a gallery or I don't know, repository for some of those, just to ask? Yeah. So I'm involved with some other groups working on vision mission stuff right now. And in particular, when you have many different people, again, with many different ideas about what they are and how they should be functioning, it's a great idea that we have this small group to try and come up with something that we can test. Some of those other groups are really doing their best to first land and understand what are the good qualities of a vision, how should it function, what are the ways in which we expect to use it. I feel like that's potentially another useful addition to what Cecilia is saying. A useful way for us maybe into this is to really understand what are the good qualities of a vision statement and a mission statement, how do we expect to use them in practice, who is going to be using them and how. Another piece that we've talked about is, core values. We've talked about a credo or some kind of a statement or a pledge that people could sign up to. I feel like the better definitions we have of those, again, sort of abstracted definitions as well as use cases and audiences could be a potentially useful step in all of this. So any reaction to that?
So maybe in regards to the point also that Cecilia said and ask, is there something that we can avoid, or to repeating some of the problems and so forth, or if there's the problem. I think one of the kind of overarching problem with all of our collective work is that since we are all so community oriented ourselves, that none of us want to make a statement of making decisions. And unfortunately, decisions are needed to be made to be able to make progress. So if every topic remains open indefinitely, and we kind of like to take out into account everyone's perspective as we should, it's very, very challenging of how do we make a decision to close that loop? Like, where does it end? And that should be a collective decision to decide how does that loop end. But so I'm sharing.
Pardon me, are you talking about this group or about ecosystem groups? About when you're talking about decision making, are you talking about this group or are you talking about ecosystems?
I'm talking about the whole field of ecosystem builders, because we are all very much alike. We are very polite people and we want to help everyone. So that kind of leads to a point where we try to avoid being the one making a statement and saying, this is it, let's move forward. So that's kind of a built-in challenge into our field. And I'm not suggesting that what is the solution. I'm just observing the problem. And but anyway, going back to that point of trying to avoid problems, I'm sharing here one of the resources that we have created, that I've shared this earlier in the Slack. And this is kind of like a Canvas tool that we have created, since we have been kind of this process many times trying to help, since we usually come to ecosystems as an outsider. So we are basically hired there to do that job for them, where they say we are unable to, kind of cut to the chase. We can't keep schedules to ourselves because we kind of keep going loops and loops. So this is one of the tools that we have created, and it's like all of the tools that we create are Creative Commons. They are, anyone can improve them, making them better. But the intention of this is similar like a business model canvas, that you have limited space and you have structural shape to connect the vision and the mission and the strategy and the values, while seeing them all in one view. Like, this forces to refine. So the tool does the trick for us. It's not that, it's hard to say you need to cut it down, but if you give a tool and say, this is the space you have, make the best out of it, then that kind of becomes helpful. And then behind that, where there are kind of the guidelines for this, there's YouTube videos linked to those that probably many of you can recognize. And those are kind of best that we can find that are logically consistent with each other, that they are not overlapping. So that's the most important thing. Whether they are the best ones out there is of course debatable, and it's not the point. The point is that they are logically consistent with each other, even though they are represented by different people. So it's not one person saying that this is how it is. There's different people representing kind of their view of where values come from, or what is a mission statement, or what are the kind of tangible targets and so forth. So just want to share this. Maybe this can be, helpful.
No, I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Valto. I think that your description for vision, as far as the long-term ambition, that was one of the things that I feel like, especially around the language that Simon Sinek uses in the Infinity Game, the idea that it is a long-term vision. I think personally what I've seen is when organizations fall short, or they limit their goals to be, and one of the things Simon Sinek pointed to was, when you say you want to be the best and then you've achieved being the best, like, what do you do after that? Do you just go away and disband? So it's so I think the languaging around the way we aim is to be a continuous stream, as opposed to being a finite goal, right? So I think that's really important to think about. Like, to try to keep it evergreen, so that as generations come, the idea is that it's a continuous long-term aim, which I like the way you defined it in your vision on the slide. So thank you for sharing that.
And I want to emphasize that these are not mine. I have just kind of been the moderator of putting the knowledge together based on kind of trying to be extremely logical in making sure that there is no inconsistencies between different terms used. So that's kind of the sources from where those come from are linked in the instruction page, the YouTube videos. And there has been like a long process behind refining, like from tens and tens of videos to what are kind of the ones that should go in there. So it's just kind of just saying, sharing the process behind this is not but kind of trying to find what can be made to fit together. But as you can see, it has no content. So that's the goal of the actual work. So it's just a tool.
You know,
Right. I was just saying thank you, Walter.
I was just going to make a comment is that all the ecosystems and wannabe ecosystems out there, they're almost by definition a little siloed, and in a vacuum, there's no place that they can look to for the best practices, for the latest tools, and where they can learn from each other. A lot of them are just too concerned with their own entrepreneurial issues to learn what works in another ecosystem, unless it's Techstars and somewhere else that publishes something. So it's a perfect role for Kaufman, and it's an ongoing role. Is to be out there and vetting and publishing what's working today, because it's always going to be changing based on tools, based on something we've learned out there. There's some innovative ecosystem, for instance, I'm making it up, but in New Hampshire, right? How is everybody going to know that, something that they've done that can benefit everyone else? Either New Hampshire starts to promote it, or there's an organization like Kaufman to have it centrally and to push it, to understand it, to curate it, and then to push it out to everybody. So I think there's a terrific and ongoing role for this.
So I'll say that I think that's a great point, and it's what a lot. And this is I'm kind of referring back to the goals as a set, and trying to figure out how they integrate and how they work together, and which pieces help achieve some of that. So as I understand it, and again, look to others, but the reason for goals like storytelling, connected networks, some of those pieces are about what that system, how that system becomes a learning system, what the types of connection are across different ecosystems, and how ecosystem builders as a field can collectively hold some of that space, and how that all happens and how that flows. I think, again, the challenge in some ways, a big part of the challenge is that what one person might call an ecosystem builder, or even what their idea is for the field and what's needed in terms of a vision, could be very, very different from someone else's who may or may not identify it even as an ecosystem builder, but that this system acknowledges needs to be part of what this work is. And so I think part of the work of this group in getting to something that we can look at and say, okay, here's a solid draft that we're proud to share with the whole, is constantly zooming out enough to be able to say, this is something that works for this field, and it works in conjunction with all the other pieces that are in place and all the other projects that are ongoing for the goals. That's my take on it, but again, would love others.
I'd like to interpret something you just said, which in a good way is there's two ways, and we can do them both, but to approach this is to say, here's what works, or here's what the best practices are. And I don't know if that's ever going to be static enough to say, here's what you should do. However, what you just said before is to constantly be out there with stories, anecdotal and other data to say, here's what works, here's what doesn't work in these situations. Maybe give case study, well, minor case studies that say, look, here's where the leadership breaks down. Here's where you can't have a single ecosystem builder, et cetera. And so whether that collectively turns into best practices, great. If not, it's still where a prospective ecosystem builder can come, and instead of being told, here's what you have to do, they can look and learn to see what works, what doesn't work, but only a Kaufman can really do that. Be the curator, the central, I don't like repository, but the central organization that's, collecting all of this.
I think we've done a really good job at synthesizing a lot of the information that's coming out of the community. But I'd love to hear from people like Hassan and Brett, who look at what they're doing on the city level and find, what is it, because all the cities that you work with are so different, and how you come together and focus on missions. Are there common themes that you're seeing?
And you mean that in terms of how they're kind of informally creating the guiding force of the ecosystem, or do you mean that in a more specific way?
Well, because they're coming together with a vision, right? A joint mission. The individuals that come together at the city level from their own organizations, and they're focusing on something together as a city, and how you come about trying to synthesize all that information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what's interesting, and Hassan, I don't know, I mean, we blend so much of our work, so I think I'm probably speaking for both of us, but is how we really have to overcome the selfish interest when we're trying to do exactly that. And organizationally, I'm not going to name any names with cities, but organizationally, you have people that come to the table, and they ultimately are there on the front end to try to create what they might not even call ecosystem building, because they know that they have to make sure that they're able to get a chunk of the pie, so to say, if it's foundation supported, if it's municipal supported. And so there is no real shared vision that I see in the beginning. And even when we help them, again, I love Valto's framing of this, but we think community front and let community make decisions. Even when we go through a process, months, even years into it, there's still kind of a very fluid sense of what they've established in terms of what they would call themselves members of on an ecosystem level. And I think that's the biggest challenge. I don't know if what I'm saying is helping to inform the conversation, but I think that, there has to be a clean articulation of what an ecosystem is, of why you need to surrender some selfish interest to be a part of it, of how exactly it's going to be built and maintained. And then through all that, identity is formed, right? And we're given a chance to create what probably is a pretty unique vision for each city. And so for our sake, that would mean, coming universal with a vision about ecosystem building in general, but being ready to pivot that to unique cases. And I think if anything, COVID has really shined a light on how, it's interesting, like we do work in so many different cities outside of our ESHIP communities work, and each one of them has taken a very unique path to this. And now COVID has kind of leveled the playing field. Everybody's thinking the same about how they have to get resources out to those people who might be underconnected to those resources. And it's helped us to be able to take a more universal approach to cities that we had to be very, very specific and strategic about in the past. So that is leveling the playing field in some ways, but there is still going to be that customization of, well, when we think of an ecosystem in city X versus city Y, what's important to us is that ESOs don't really pay much attention to people of color. Or in City Y, it's going to be more along the lines of, well, we feel like equity is valued, but there's competition among ESOs and they don't want to play in the same sandbox. And so that vision of what an ecosystem needs to end up becoming really gets uniquely defined with those parameters.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that, I mean, if there is a mission or vision at the onset, most of the people in that city are coming together around building an equitable and inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem. I mean, that's ultimately why they're all engaging Forward Cities. What that looks like over the course of 2 years and what that means to different people is, I mean, totally different across 2 years. There are folks that are at the onset that may believe that they're being equitable and inclusive, and that there isn't much work to be done. Then you ask someone who's at the community level and they are totally at the other end of the spectrum in terms of how they view the ecosystem. So ultimately, everybody in each one of these cities, whether they're a philanthropic organization, whether they're folks from the city, folks from an ESO, from a community organization, everybody is coming together around building an equitable and inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem. And they're all coming together, to Brett's point, for different reasons. But at the same time, even though they're all coming together for that ultimate purpose, what that means is totally different to most of the people that are around the table.
I think that's a great defining point, because the goal number one, I think the thing that we always try to bake into everything around the ESHIP goals is inclusivity, and the idea that ecosystems should be equitable. I don't know that that's a bad thing to write out. I'm welcome. I welcome anybody to contribute. I know it's probably not a popular opinion not to voice, right? But I think we could and should speak out for the fact that it should be equitable and inclusive. Is that something that feels right or correct, or is that something that we can align on? Because I think the whole idea of doing this, the field line mission and vision, is defined as create and build alignment. So is that an alignment that we should strive for?
So first of all, yes, that's real snow. It was this morning. And in the spirit of the president, my wife gave the weather permission to snow, and then she gave the weather permission to stop snowing. So this was all allowed by my wife. She informed me of that earlier this afternoon. But anyway,
very kind of her.
Yeah, she's all powerful. Anyway, so Celia, here's the problem. If you don't bake it into the front as a front and center issue, it doesn't get talked about. In our own experience, when you around the area of futures of work and any of that stuff, if you don't make it explicit, then like in a lot of the policy discussion around future of work, it's not hard to read into it. They're talking about males who are white and 35. And that's who people are worried about in terms of that discussion. So if you don't bake it in, if it's not front and center, it doesn't happen. So I got a call from Egypt. That's really interesting. Go ahead.
Question for Mike, just keep an eye on our time here. I think there's two opportunities here. One is these questions that Beth put together, and Beth and Hassan, I think, put together. When I look through them, I see that about 20% of us have weighed in on any of these specific questions. So question number one is, how can we get everybody else to weigh in on these? And then my sense is, to follow Volto's lead, is if we don't already have a process figured out to the next step, is then we use Volto's canvas, because I think it looks helpful. and just how do we get this sandbox document, which is going to be a bunch of blah, 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 blahs from all of us, to then start getting it into the canvas. And I welcome Mike to step in, or Beth or Hassan if you have other thoughts. I just want to be cognizant of our time here, and I want to make sure that we don't have to wait, or that we use the time in between the monthly calls to move things forward.
And I just want to clarify our goal, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, our goal with that document or sandbox is for everybody to put their input in so that we can identify specific themes that will pop out at us, so that then we can have kind of more of a framework to develop the draft vision statement, correct? Or statements for the field and for the ecosystem builder itself.
So let me
Yep.
ask you, does that make sense to share it out broadly and give the community a chance to weigh in, and this group become more of a synthesizing group? Or do we answer the questions, define something, create a draft, and then share that draft with the community to get
I
buy-in?
think a decision that was made earlier is that these questions will be incorporated in the ESHIP Summit registration. So there will be a point to gather in at least a couple hundred people, but I don't think we should wait until that moment. I think we would refine what this group feels is right, and then when that data does arrive.
I wholeheartedly agree with that one, because if you don't put a stake in the ground, it's going to become a free-for-all. Anybody who's ever been involved with, for instance, a new SEC rule, you see that, about all the different input. And if you don't want this to take 4 years, let's put a stake in the ground, and then people can comment on it.
Totally. And I think there's also, if you scroll down the long document, is all the input from previous years and other things that we've had input on. So yeah,
Yes.
I'd really be curious to hear what everyone, not hear, but see in the document where everyone else is at. And I know partially, I think this got sent out sort of via Slack, and we're all busy. So I just want to focus on make sure we action plan to get that at least filled in, and then we can figure out. Mike, did you have thoughts as the facilitator here?
Yeah, I think the canvas is great. Thanks for sharing that, Valto. And I think it makes a lot of sense. It seems to incorporate and give direction on each piece of this and how they fit together. I think there's no reason not to use it if everybody's okay with that as a kind of aggregation and guidance piece. Thumbs up from everybody. Any thumbs up? Any issues? Good. Cool. I think the point about how we're using those questions is exactly right. We're hoping to have that type of input from the larger group. I still think there is, in addition to this canvas, I think it gives some good guidance there. I still think there's, especially looking in the vision section, I think we can probably also articulate a little bit more about what looks very good vision statement in addition to what's there, how we plan on using that. In terms of next steps, agreed, the Slack channel and the sandbox together seem like the right places for that. Between now and, sorry, did I freeze? Am I here? Okay, good. Between now and next month, can we say, first of all, maybe in the next week, is it possible for everybody to weigh into those questions in the sandbox document? Is that possible? Great. I'll put another question there around what makes a good vision, or how do you plan on using it, or how do we need to use it? Valto, what's the best way for us to use a blank canvas here? Is there one that we can just create in a Google, is it a slide? Yeah, can we just create a new one and link that in the Slack channel?
Yeah, so basically, since that is also like, I was looking at myself also now that it makes sense to adapt it for ecosystem, just for the sake of clarity on the terminology. So easiest way is if you might, for example, you just create your own copy from that. Create your own copy. It becomes editable, and feel free to edit the terminology and any text needed, because this is more geared for a founding startup team initially, but we have used it in our ecosystem development workshops as well, but just to kind of make the language more familiar for ESHIP audience. So totally, that's why it's Creative Commons. It's like, go ahead and adjust and improve. And then I think that from the process perspective, that giving people free space as much they want to contribute for the document, but giving this kind of something like, this is how the end result is going to be kind of curated into, gives them an idea to see what type of language is, and if someone is kind of super ambitious wanting to get their thing in there, they try to get as close to, you know, complete as possible by naturally. And then those who have a lot of things that they want to include, they still have free space to write it out if that's their style, kind of easier to write longer than shorter. So I think that that'll work.
Thank you. So what I did was I posted the canvas onto the agenda as well as the sandbox. And what I'll do is I'll pin the sandbox to the Slack channel. And if everyone who's chimed in can just maybe reply to that post to say, you know, we chimed in, so that we can actually think about looking back at it when more people have contributed. Does that make sense for a timeline, or at least a sense-making thing? So we'll know. Tiffany, you've been fairly quiet and you facilitate this call too. Is there something you wanted to add?
No, I really appreciated what Brett and Hassan shared, and I think that, you know, your guys' perspective from all of those different communities is really valuable, because while every community and every ecosystem builder is unique in just their culture and priorities and personality, I do think that there is a golden thread that runs through all of us. And Valto, I think you touched on that as well. And so I just want to say thank you to everyone, because I do think that this was a productive call. And thank you, CJ, for all of your questions. It's always awesome to have a fresh perspective.
I also just, thanks, Stephanie. Just one other thing that might be helpful is, I know Beth and Hassan have helped develop the questions. Can you also, would it be possible for both of you or either of you to play a little bit of a nudging role? This is a term I learned from the strategic doing folks, but essentially just remind us that if we all committed that we're going to fill it out in a week, if you see us not filling it out in a week, that Beth and Hassan should be empowered to gently nudge us and say, hey, y'all committed. If you don't want to commit, don't commit. It's cool. We know people are busy, a lot going on, but I will make a public commitment that I did not respond to the questions. But if everyone else is cool, Beth and Hassan, if you just don't mind. And then I just want to make sure we also have CJ's contact information. Cecilia, do you?
I think we need to up the ante to public shaming. Something, you know, very visible, you know, to millions.
Or at least the people on Slack.
Yeah,
or not bring you any of that candy he was talking about earlier.
Or incentives. Yeah, there's that too.
All right.
I warn you, Brett. Brett, I warn you. I'm at the age now where I don't think I can be shamed into anything. So.
So anyway, I want to give everybody back the rest of their day. I know that Andy and I have to jump on a call anyway, but thank you all.
Can I make a quick? So, Celia, you've heard me do this. So starting Tuesday, we're going to be embarking on some conversations. And these are events. The first one actually is in Cook County, Chicago. We're drawing on the Commission on Social Innovation, which is a county commission, as a beginning point. And these conversations are around the day after. So what are people thinking will be the case the day after, and what we should be thinking about doing. And so this particular group will have several within the social entrepreneurship space on the call. But they'll be recorded, and and these are all noodling sessions. So they're not getting talked at. So I'm happy to share whatever we come up with it, and they'll be recorded. They'll be on Zoom.
Will you throw that in the random channel in the Slack, group, so that people can kind of see what's going on? That would be great. Sure. Okay. Well, thank you all, and we'll look forward to hearing from everybody soon. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.